Hi, welcome. My name's John Allen, and I'm the host for Out in New Haven, where once a month we take a different topic of interest to the LGBTQ community in Greater New Haven and Connecticut and explore it in depth. And today I'm here so excited to talk with my good friend and mentor, David Winthrop Knapp. He's 91 years old and a very young, youthful spirit. And David actually came out as a married man in his middle age. And he lives his life as an out, authentic gay man and devotes his time and resources to the issues that are most dear to him. He's an ardent supporter of LGBT causes in all aspects of his life. Some of the many organizations that he works with is certainly the New Haven Pride Center, the Stonewall Speakers Bureau, True Colors for Gay Youth, the PFLAG Group, which is the Parents and Friends of Lesbian and Gays, his church, which is the First Congregational Church in Guilford, and most significantly, the Boy Scouts of America. So today we want to talk about David's passion for LGBT causes and the legacy that he is creating. So welcome, David. I'm so glad to have you here.
Thank you for inviting me.
Yeah. So I think, as we talk about some of the many things that you're doing that are advancing and supporting the LGBTQ community, what do how did you ever get to this point?
This point, you mean in the LGBT?
Right.
Really? Well, I discovered I was gay. I was married, and I discovered that I had children. I discovered that I was gay around the age of 50, and having been married at the age of 30, and then came out to my wife and to everyone at around the age of 60. So and then we got divorced. So that gave me the freedom to follow, my gay life and start a new life, really. But also still stayed very active with my all my heterosexual friends. I have probably just as many or more heterosexual friends and organizations, or even more possibly than gay. So I sort of operate in both worlds, but
I think that's one of the things that was so, endearing about you is that while you came out, and you certainly have come out within your lifetime, to be gay was considered illegal. It was considered a mental illness at one point, right. But you came out just as those things were starting to change, and yet you just have been out loud and proud since you came out. You were always the same person you were before you came out and after you came out, and I think that's admirable. Well,
thank you for saying it. I basically didn't change, my very much in my lifestyle or things that I like to do and enjoy and work at and serve in many different organizations. That pretty much stayed the same, and I continued with basically the same organizations after I came out and got a lot of publicity about it that I was in before I came out. Because I liked the hiking group, I liked sailing, I liked civic organizations and various civic causes and things like that. So I've really been doing that really all my life.
Mm-hmm. I think that the big organization that really has been life-changing for you has been the Boy Scouts, both in becoming a Boy Scout, becoming an Eagle Scout, your advocacy for the Boy Scouts as an adult leader, and then when you were kicked out of the Boy Scouts when it became known that you were gay. I think that that has really helped to shape and define your life in so many ways. Can you talk a little bit about what the Boy Scouts was to you before and what happened after you were kicked out?
Yes, I'd be very happy and proud to do that. I joined the Scouts at the age of 12 in 1938, and I lived in a little rural village outside of Highland Park, New Brunswick, New Jersey, of maybe, 30 or 40 houses way out in the sticks. And there really was nothing. I mean, there was no organized sports or anything at all. And so, and I wasn't, a good athlete. So when I joined the Boy Scouts, I loved it right from the very beginning. And I had to go into New Brunswick to about 3 or 4 miles from where I lived to go to a Boy Scout troop. And went to Boy Scout camp and loved that in 1938, 39, and 40. Remember, we had 80 kids and a wood stove for the cook and 8-hole latrine for 80 kids and no running water.
Oh my goodness.
And
that's really camping.
Well, yeah, but we lived in tents, of course. But anyway, I just loved it. And so then I went off to Wesleyan in 1940 and 1950. No, I'm sorry, went off to Wesleyan in 1945 with all the World War II vets. And then I was just a handful of kids just out of high school. And then graduated in 49, and then came back home and worked for a couple years and got my teaching certificate at Rutgers in history, and then went back into my old Boy Scout troop as an Explorer Advisor, which was a brand new program at that time, and found out that they had paid positions in the Boy Scouts, which I didn't know. I thought everybody was a volunteer.
Right.
And so I worked for 10 years as a professional Boy Scout executive.
Being paid, making your living.
Being paid, yes.
Mm-hmm.
In
Wonderful.
Suffolk County, Long Island, which at that time was, in 1950, was pretty much wilderness. Pine barrens,
Right.
duck farms, potato farms, and fishermen. And a lot of, really poor villages in Coram and Selden and Hauppauge and Wisconsin and Center Beach, towns like that. And they had no athletic program, they had nothing. And I went from town to town and village organizing new cub packs, new troops. And I was like an itinerant preacher. And they were so appreciative, and I just loved doing it. And then I ran a scout camp at Camp Wading Hollow and Wading River, which is still there, by the way.
Wonderful.
For about 250 scouts a week and a staff of 75, so that was a big operation. And then I did the same thing in Maplewood, South Orange, Short Hills, Millburn, very wealthy
In New
areas,
Jersey.
for 5 years. And then when I got married and acquired a wife, 2 stepdaughters, 11 and 13, bought a house and had a new baby, that ended my professional Boy Scout career. Both money-wise and also time-wise. I worked 80 hours a week for 10 years,
Wow.
but loved
Amazing.
it.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
So I dropped out of scouting. And then when I retired from selling textbooks for 23 years here in Connecticut, the local scout leaders in Madison and Guilford asked me to come back into scouting. As
And
a
what time period was this?
This would have been, I retired in 1993 from selling textbooks.
I see. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I was 66 at
I
that
see.
time.
Mm-hmm.
And the local scout volunteers in Madison and Guilford asked me if I would come back in as a volunteer, working as a commissioner, helping to recruit and train and advise local scout leaders and troops, because they wanted my experience. And
Right.
I loved scouting and believed in it passionately. And so I did that.
But at this point, you had already come out to yourself,
yes,
at least.
Yes, yeah, I came out to myself, but I wasn't out publicly.
Right.
I just felt it was nobody's business what my private
It was
life
also
was.
a different time period, too. It was
Right.
pre-Ellen.
And then, as you and many people know, one day the vice president of the new Quinnipiac Boy Scout Council in New Haven came to my house along with the assistant scout executive and said, we have bad news for you, you're being expelled from the Boy Scouts of America. And I was totally shocked and just overwhelmed. I couldn't imagine what I had done. I said, you know, well, what have I done? He said, you haven't done anything. I said, well, then why am I being expelled? And he said, well, do you really want to know? And I said, of course I do. And he said, we have discovered that you are a homosexual. And I also found out very sadly from an inside source that one of my stepdaughters who'd cut me off had secretly written a letter to the New Haven Council.
So
telling
tragic.
them. So that was pretty devastating. And then somebody spilled the beans to the newspaper, the New Haven Register, and the reporter called me and said he was writing a front page article on Sunday morning, with or without my help or cooperation.
Right.
But so I said, well, I'll talk with you on the condition you not use my name. He honored that. He wrote a very fair an accurate article. Josh Kovner was the
I remember
reporter.
that article too.
And so that was.
You know, one of the things that I was I was doing some research and with your help, realized that one of the things you said was that there's been an unexpected silver lining to the humiliation he underwent during his expulsion. And your quote was, "I've done all sorts of wonderful things that would have never had happened if I had not been kicked out." And that was when you became the one of the Out Magazine 100 in 2013.
Right. Yes. Well, that and several other things that happened because I was deeply hurt and very angry.
And this was the magazine.
Right.
That you appeared as one of the Out 100.
And so I was deeply hurt, and because I loved scouting and believed in it passionately, I devoted 10 years of my professional life to it, and I was very angry because when I was in scouting as a boy and professional, they had no policy about homosexual membership at all, and so they used to lie about that in some cases and tell the media that this is a policy we've always had since 1910, which is an absolute lie. And
when did they officially add that there could be no gay
in
people?
1978.
Wow.
When I was out of scouting.
Wow.
They somewhat surreptitiously, really, passed a new policy that said that any Cub Scout, Boy Scout, Explorer, or adult leader who was simply found to be a homosexual, they enjoyed using that term at that time, was to be immediately expelled or not admitted.
Right.
And they really kept it very quiet and did not put it in the training courses and in all cases and the manuals. So a lot of leaders didn't even know they had the policy, which in some ways was good.
Right.
And then it was the James Dale case in 1993 that went to the Supreme Court when everybody learned that they had the policy then.
I see.
So anyway, I just felt that it was against everything that scouting stood for, as well as my religious beliefs. You know, my Protestant religious beliefs. And so because I was angry and hurt both, I said, I'm going to fight the Boy Scouts on this policy to the day I die. And I was then what, 66 or 66, yeah, 66 or 67. And I said, my mother lived to be 99, and you're going to have a long fight on your hand. And so for 22 years, 23 years almost, I and a handful of others, only maybe 10 or 12 volunteers from all over the country who were mostly heterosexual scout leaders, okay? Most of them were not gay.
Yeah. So straight allies.
And we went to the national council meetings, you know, in Texas and San Diego and Boston and Philadelphia, and picketed in our scout uniforms, the big signs saying, don't discriminate, you know.
Right, and there's certainly
on
photos of you in marching in the New York Pride
then we
Parade.
marched in the New York Pride Parade. I think out of the 13 or 14,000 marchers, In most cases, I was the only one in a Boy Scout uniform
Right.
for most of those years, marching with my P-Flag chapter. They were very supportive. So we got cheers all the way down to Fifth Avenue for
How
P-Flag,
exciting.
and also
Right.
my sign in Boy Scouts. We changed the sign every year, you know.
Right.
70, 75, 80, 85-year-old Boy Scout leader kicked out for being gay was what was on the sign.
Right.
And then I picketed some of the council offices here in Connecticut also.
Right.
And then eventually, that wasn't as really as effective in changing them as what I did later on, which is later years, was working within the Boy Scout system and working through the local council, which had then become the Connecticut Yankee Council combined
Right.
with Fairfield. And by working through my church, and we sponsored a scout troop, so that every sponsor has one representative on the local council who can submit resolutions at the annual meeting.
Right.
So I submitted a resolution to my church committee saying repeal the policy. And initially they said that's not going to work. And they suggested a policy where the Connecticut Yankee Council was requesting that the National Council permit the Connecticut Yankee Council to give each sponsoring organization, PTA, church, Rotary Club, veterans organization, the right to follow their own policy on homosexual membership for their scout units. In other words, give both sides what they wanted. So I said, well, it's worth a try.
Right.
So our representative took it to the local council. They accepted it. They said, we're going to take it to the National Council and fight for it, which they did some 4 or 5 years ago. And initially, they wouldn't even let it come up. But then the second year, they allowed it to be read aloud. And that was the hole in the dike, you know.
And when was this?
This was in 2000, I think 14.
That's when this was all
They
changed.
finally evolved the policy. They first changed the policy. We're going to drop the policy against boys from 7 to 17. And they did that. And that was, you know, half a loaf is better than nothing.
Right.
And then the next year when Bob Gates came in, he said, initially, I'm not going to let the subject come up. We've been through too much pain and agony, and we need to let the dust settle. And the Scouts for Equality group that I'm in said, we'll support you. We're not going to fight you for a couple years. And then Bob Gates said, we can't go on forever losing membership, losing money. They were way down. I mean, when I left scouting professionally, I think there were maybe 5 million boys in 1960. And they've lost membership every single year. They were down to 2.4 million, I think, last year.
So certainly half
So
of
he
that.
said, we've got to drop the policy for adults. And so that was it, and it was a wonderful thing. So if I had stayed in scouting, I wouldn't have approved of the policy, but I wouldn't have fought it if I wanted to stay as a volunteer.
Right.
So so it was good that even though
So you were a professional nudge.
that I did get. And
Yeah. Well, you know, I think it's really commendable. Even your university, Wesleyan University, gave you a Distinguished Alumnus Award, and in their comment to you, they said, among other things, through your relentless efforts, you compelled even the most imposing of organizations, the Boy Scouts of America, to listen.
That really surprised me, because I mean they select like 8 people who were really outstanding. I mean, you know, the founder of Southwest Airlines and state governors of states and famous scientists and people like that. So I always felt that I really didn't deserve to get the Distinguished Alumnus Award, but they apparently did.
Well, out of tragedy, there's been so much triumph, and you know, just some of the things that we brought here, I just wanted to share. You know, when you became an Eagle Scout in 1944, you produced this letter that you still have of when Franklin Roosevelt was an honorary officer, and one of the national officers was Theodore Roosevelt. I mean, that's just incredible that you've been a part of
And
this
Herbert
organization.
Hoover. Herbert Hoover was living.
Is
Also?
Herbert Hoover on this?
Yes.
Yeah, yes, he is.
Right.
So
Marshall Field. And
it's just amazing, what you've seen in your lifetime. But I also want to talk about, because of these, the tragedy of you being kicked out of the Boy Scouts and what you had to go through to continue to be honest to yourself and to those that you love and cherish. You really, have helped make the LGBT community in Connecticut a better place, not only through your participation, but through your philanthropy. Certainly the New Haven Pride Center is a significant beneficiary. And let's see what we have. You've been honored with a Dorothy Award, which is an award that is given out to those leaders in the community that have helped to improve the life in Connecticut. And you were an early award winner of the Dorothy Awards. That you've also been very active in the GLSEN organization, and you were recognized for your generosity and participation. GLSEN stands for the Gay Lesbian Educators, Straight Educators Network,
right.
Which also happens to meet at the New Haven Pride Center.
Right.
You've been an
I was
early,
one of the founders of that group.
and you're one of the founders
Garrett
of that
Stack
group.
and John Edwards.
How wonderful!
1987, I think we met in their home.
Yeah,
to
you
start
were
the GLSEN organization.
you were given a Sexuality Educator of the Year award from the Sexuality Information and Education Council of Connecticut.
I'm not sure what that was about. Well, I sold the school health books, I guess, among all the other major subjects.
But then the thing that I know that you've been very passionate about is the Stonewall Speakers Bureau of Connecticut. Right. And there is now an annual award, the David Knapp Award at the Stonewall Speakers. And maybe you can tell just a little bit about what the Stonewall Speakers is and what the importance of that organization is.
Yes, and a lot of people either forgot about it or never knew that in 1987, wasn't it? 1987, we had a murder here in Connecticut of a gay man that was very parallel to the Matthew Shepard case, which practically everybody knows about.
Right.
And it got a lot of publicity in Connecticut, the Hartford Courant, the Boston Globe, and New England, but almost no publicity outside of New England, which really makes me angry. It should have gotten just as much publicity as the Matthew Shepard did.
Right.
And it was a young man who grew up in Cheshire, was valedictorian there, a graduate of MIT, was a mid-level manager at Aetna, and was gay. This was back in the 70s and 80s. And anyway, there were two young men from one from South Catholic High School and one from Bulkey High School in Hartford, who were going around beating up and robbing gay men at the gay bars in the Hartford area, Chez Est, and actually they met him at Chez Est, which is still there, I think.
Yes, it's still.
And they followed him home to his apartment and forced their way in, and got a fireplace log and chased him down the stairs, and he called them fag and queer and homo, and he pleaded with them, said, "Please don't kill me." Anyway, they crushed his skull, they broke every bone in his body, and so anyway, they were tried as adults. They were sentenced to 30 to 40 years in prison. And the defense attorney said this is such a tragedy for everyone.
Yes.
There's an urgent need for education about the subject, particularly for high school students.
Right. And so you've been able to, through the Stonewall Speakers Bureau, you've been able to go around to all the high schools and middle schools.
Initially, I mean, I was still, when it happened, I was still working, and I was not part of Stonewall. I wasn't in the gay community at all because I was still working and selling textbooks. And so then when I retired in 1993, I found out about the organization and offered to speak with them.
Right.
And then it's all volunteer.
Yes.
So the president resigned a couple of years later, and called me and said, you know, if you want to take it over and run it, fine. If not, that's the end of it because the board's no longer meeting and so forth.
Right.
So I did that, and because of selling school textbooks to high schools primarily, I knew all the health teachers, all the social studies teachers, math, science, and so forth. So I started calling all the health teachers and said, because they knew all the top salesmen from the top textbook companies. And they'd say, Dave, you know, how's your retirement? And I said, well, it's great, and I have a new project, and we'd like to come and speak to your health classes.
And so how many, have you been to all the schools, the high schools?
Well, when we had our 25th reunion a couple years ago, they said that we had been to 97%.
Wow.
Of the,
that is
there's
so
approximately
amazing.
160 high schools and spoken to over 100,000 students. And so we had a major impact on changing the homophobic atmosphere of most high schools.
Part of that was in 1991, Connecticut became the third state in the country to offer civil rights protection for LGBT citizens. And so I think that, you know, that's some incredible work that you're doing. In our remaining moment, I did just want to comment that, you know, ask you, what do you think has been the key to your successful life? If you have just a few words of wisdom.
Well, obviously, my parents and my upbringing, which I'm very thankful for and was very blessed with, and the role models that my parents gave me, so I think that is probably the most important. And I also grew up in a community, New Brunswick, Highland Park area, where it was really it was a community, a self-contained community by itself in central Jersey. And there was a very positive environment. It was during the war, actually.
Right. So you had an opportunity to grow up in an idyllic community, but
yes, I mean, yet I lived in a relatively poor blue-collar area with first-generation immigrants, Italian, Hungarian, and Polish. So I was a minority growing up.
Well, I think what's happened is we've run out of time, and so this has been a lot of fun, David, and I'm so pleased that we were able to come here and talk about the things that have made your life a success. And thank you.
Thank you. Serving others is the most important thing.